I stood at the entrance of one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, the kind where reservations were made months in advance and the wine list came in its own leather-bound book. The maitre d' barely glanced at me before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said with a polite but firm tone. "There's no reservation under your name." I blinked, momentarily thrown off. "That's impossible. I was invited to dinner with my husband's family. They should already be here." He tapped his tablet. "There's a reservation for 6 under the name Ethan Callahan, but I'm afraid—" A sharp voice cut through the conversation like a blade dipped in perfume. "Oh, Samantha," the voice sang out, dripping with faux amusement. "Did you really think you were invited tonight?" I turned and there she was, Vivian Callahan, my mother-in-law. Draped in an expensive cashmere shawl, platinum hair set in perfect curls, eyes gleaming with superiority. She was flanked by her daughters, Haley and Brooke, seated at a candlelit table just behind her. And there, in the middle, was Ethan, my husband, sitting stiffly, his eyes darting between us, saying nothing. "I don't understand," I said calmly, though my stomach twisted. Vivian's smile widened as if I were a child who just failed a simple math test. "Sweetheart, this is a family dinner. A place like this?" She gestured around with a manicured hand. "Well, it's a bit out of your league, don't you think? Maybe something more budget-friendly would suit you better." Haley snickered behind her wine glass. Brooke looked away, trying, failing, not to meet my eyes. Ethan gripped his fork, but didn't say a single word. The sting of humiliation was sharp, like a slap to the face. I could feel the glances from nearby tables, the rising tension like a storm building in slow motion. But strangely, I didn't feel the urge to cry or run. I felt something else entirely. Clarity. Strength. I straightened my spine and offered the maitre d' a calm smile. "Would you be so kind," I said smoothly, "as to ask the owner to come out?" Vivian laughed. "Oh, please. You think Julian Prescott is going to come out here just because you asked?" I didn't break eye contact. "Yes," I said simply, "because Julian knows me very well." There it was, the first flicker of doubt in Vivian's eyes. She had spent years treating me like an outsider. Tonight, she escalated her game to public humiliation. But she'd gone too far. The maitre d' hesitated, unsure, and then, "Samantha?" A rich, commanding voice sliced through the tension. I turned to see Julian Prescott himself, early 50s, elegant in a tailored charcoal suit, salt and pepper hair combed neatly back. He looked at me with genuine warmth, not dismissal. "Julian," I greeted with a knowing smile. "It's been a while." He glanced at Vivian, then to Ethan and the rest of the table, then back at me. "It has. What brings you here tonight?" I gestured toward the table. Apparently, I wasn't included in the reservation. Bit of an oversight, wouldn't you say? His expression darkened, but only briefly before he turned to the maitre d'. "That won't do at all." Vivian scoffed. "Oh, please, Julian. This is a private establishment. You don't just walk in and expect a seat." "You're right," Julian said smoothly. "We don't accept walk-ins." Then he turned toward her and added with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "But Samantha's not a walk-in, she's family." The entire table froze. Haley nearly dropped her glass. Brooke's jaw went slack. Ethan, still silent, gripped his fork tighter. And Vivian? Her face went pale. She had no idea that tonight her little game would backfire in front of everyone. Because this wasn't just dinner anymore. It was the beginning of the end, for them. Vivian's eyes narrowed into slits, her confidence faltering for the first time since I met her. "Family?" she repeated, her voice sharp, almost shrill. "You must be mistaken. Samantha is my son's wife. That's all." Julian didn't flinch. "Actually, no. I'm not mistaken at all." She opened her mouth to argue, but I stepped in smoothly. "Julian and I go way back," I said, keeping my voice light but clear enough for everyone at the nearby tables to hear. "Before I married Ethan, I worked in fine dining. Julian was my mentor." The silence that followed was almost delicious. Vivian blinked, confused. Haley shifted uncomfortably in her seat while Brooke looked at Ethan, silently demanding an explanation he didn't have. Julian nodded. That's right. Samantha was one of the best students I ever had. I personally trained her in hospitality and high-end service. She had a gift for it. I saw it then. The exact moment Vivian realized this evening had spun entirely out of her control. She had expected to see me beg, cry, walk away in shame. Instead, she was now watching the owner of the most exclusive restaurant in the city not only defend me, but honor me. And I wasn't finished. I turned to the maitre d', who still stood awkwardly by the host stand. I assume Julian's word is good enough to find me a seat? The man straightened immediately. Of course, Ms. Callahan. I'll have the staff prepare a table right away. Vivian's mouth twisted. This is absurd. Julian smiled politely. What's absurd is the treatment she just endured from her own family. A waiter rushed over and began setting a new place, right next to Ethan. I couldn't help but let a smirk play at my lips. Oh, would you look at that? I mused. Plenty of room after all. Vivian's hands curled into fists on the tablecloth, her nails pressing into the expensive linen. She leaned in, hissing under her breath. You think this changes anything? I leaned just slightly closer, my tone still measured. What changes everything, Vivian, is that you tried to humiliate me and failed. She scoffed, glancing around. You're being dramatic. No, I said with a small smile. I'm just having dinner with family. Julian placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. I'll have the chef prepare something special for you, Samantha. Vivian choked on her wine. Something special? On the house, Julian said, turning to walk back toward the kitchen. As it should be. The waiter placed a freshly polished silver plate in front of me minutes later, an amuse-bouche, delicate, artfully arranged, and no doubt meant for a VIP. I picked up my fork with practiced ease and cut into the dish. This looks incredible, I said softly, savoring the flavors. Absolutely exquisite. Across the table, Haley and Brooke sat stiff as statues, clearly unsure where this was going. Ethan still hadn't said a word, his eyes fixed on his wine like it could rescue him. Vivian took a slow sip of her own drink before placing the glass down a bit too hard. I suppose, she said, her voice forced. It's only natural that someone like you would know people in the service industry. I raised an eyebrow. Service? You know, she waved a manicured hand. Waiting tables, kitchen work. Not exactly the kind of background our family is used to. Ah, there it was. The reason for the entire stunt tonight. Not just to leave me out, but to remind everyone of what she believed I truly was. A nobody. A waitress who didn't belong at the table. I took a sip of wine before replying. You say that like it's a bad thing. Vivian's eyes flickered just for a second. She hadn't expected me to meet her dig with dignity. She kept going. It must have been quite the adjustment, marrying into a family like ours. I looked to Ethan then. He still wouldn't meet my gaze, and suddenly, something inside me snapped into place, hard, certain, unshakable. This wasn't just Vivian's cruelty, it was Ethan's silence. Because this wasn't the first time she tried to belittle me. It had happened at our wedding, at Christmas last summer, and every single time he let it slide. But tonight, he had let her go too far, and I had let him go too far. I set my wine glass down, slow, deliberate, a gesture not of surrender, but declaration. The entire table fell into a tense hush. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows gently on the linen-draped surface, eyes fixed on Vivian. Do you know what the real difference is between you and me? I asked, my voice smooth as silk but edged like glass. She tilted her head, smug curiosity flashing in her eyes. I worked for everything I have, I said. Silence. Vivian's expression hardened instantly. Excuse me? You heard me, I replied, not blinking. I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't inherit status. I built my career from the ground up, and yet, I gestured at the table. Here we are, eating at the same restaurant, served the same food, treated with the same respect. Haley stiffened. Brooke pressed her lips together, trying to hide a reaction. Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. For the first time since I'd known her, I saw something flicker behind Vivian's carefully constructed facade. Fear. Not because I'd raised my voice or made a scene, but because I hadn't. Because I was calm, controlled, unshakable. And that terrified her. "You've spent years trying to convince me I don't belong," I continued, my tone unwavering. "That I'm just some gold-digging nobody who latched onto your son. But tonight, in front of everyone, you've shown them exactly who you are." And Vivian's knuckles whitened as she clenched her napkin. "You're twisting everything," she hissed. I smiled. "No, Vivian, I'm clarifying it." Then I turned to Ethan, my husband, the man who had watched all of this unfold with his mouth shut and his spine nowhere to be found. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. It hit me then, not as a shock, but as something I'd known all along and only now dared to admit. Ethan had never chosen me. Not when his mother excluded my family from our rehearsal dinner. Not when she gave me a cookbook for The Clueless Wife on Christmas. Not when she insulted me in front of his colleagues last summer, and certainly not tonight. He had let it all happen, every time, with the same cowardly silence. I drew in a breath, steady, deep. "Ethan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Say something." He looked up finally, his eyes flickering with guilt, but not remorse. "Samantha, maybe we shouldn't do this here," he mumbled. I laughed, not bitter, not cruel, just done. "There it is," I said. "The great Ethan Callahan, always afraid to upset Mommy." Vivian shot him a glance then, sharp, cold, and for the first time her face faltered, not with rage, but something closer to disappointment. "You let her humiliate me," I said, louder now. "You watched it happen like always, and you said nothing." "I was trying to keep the peace," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Peace?" I scoffed. "Vivian orchestrated an entire dinner to publicly exclude me. That wasn't peace, Ethan. That was betrayal. And you handed her the knife." He opened his mouth, closed it again, and suddenly the man I'd once trusted with my heart looked so very small. I looked around the table one more time, Haley and Brooke both wide-eyed and silent, Vivian fuming but stunned, Ethan frozen. And me? I had never been clearer. "I think I'm done here," I said, standing, smoothing my dress. "Enjoy your family dinner." Vivian leaned in, her voice venomous. "You can't just walk away." I turned toward Julian, who had reappeared near the kitchen door, arms crossed, watching everything with a careful, almost amused gaze. "Julian," I said, offering a nod. "Thank you for the hospitality. It was lovely seeing you." "Always a pleasure, Samantha," he said without hesitation. Then I looked back at Ethan, one last time. "You coming?" He froze, and in that split second I already knew the answer. He looked to his mother, to his sisters, and then he looked down. Of course, he wasn't going to follow me. He never had. I smiled, not sad, not angry, resolved, because he hadn't chosen me. But I had, and soon they were all going to find out exactly what that meant. I stepped out of the restaurant without looking back. The cool night air hit my face like a cleansing wind. I could still feel the stares from inside. Vivian's frozen fury, Ethan's shame, Haley and Brooke's wide-eyed silence. But out here, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was what came next. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as steel. "Me. We're moving forward. Initiate the process first thing tomorrow." The reply came seconds later. "Attorney. Understood. You'll have the first draft of the divorce settlement by noon." There it was. Divorce. The word didn't scare me. It liberated me. What scared me was how long I'd lived in denial, telling myself Ethan just needed time, that maybe Vivian would come around, that I could hold everything together if I just stayed quiet, stayed respectful, stayed small. But tonight had snapped the last thread holding me back. I arrived home before Ethan. Of course I did. He probably stayed behind to comfort Mommy and explain away my outburst. He'd been doing that our entire marriage, covering for her, excusing her, sacrificing me. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I walked into the home office, the one he called his space, the one he used to manage his investments, brag about his success. I went straight to the safe. He had never changed the passcode. A rookie mistake. I opened it easily. Inside were all the documents he thought he kept hidden from me: bank statements, investment agreements, asset transfers, and more importantly, the one document that mattered most: the contract that tied his most lucrative investment venture to my original funding. My eyes scanned the familiar text. Every clause, every signature. This was the smoking gun, the proof that I was the backbone of his so-called empire. The money he used to build his brand, his reputation, his ego, it wasn't his. It had been mine all along. I took a photo of the contract with my phone, then gently placed it back in the safe. No need to take it. He wouldn't even know I'd been here. But I had what I needed. Next, I moved to the bedroom. I pulled out a suitcase and started packing. Not frantically, not tearfully, not like a woman running from pain. I packed like a woman walking into power. Every item that went into the suitcase was a quiet declaration. I'm done. I'm done begging to be seen. I'm done asking for space at a table I helped build. I'm done lowering my light for people who live in shadows. By the time Ethan walked through the door, I was seated on the couch, suitcase by my side, waiting. He paused, his eyes landing on the luggage. Samantha. His voice was uncertain. What are you doing? I stood, calm and composed. I'm leaving. His mouth opened, but no words came out. You made your choice, Ethan, I said. Back there, at that table, when your mother humiliated me, for the 100th time, and you just sat there. He rubbed the back of his neck, flustered. I was trying to keep the peace. I laughed, low and tired. Peace? That wasn't peace. That was compliance. You've spent our entire marriage trying not to rock the boat. Except you never noticed I was the one drowning. He stepped forward. Samantha, come on. It's complicated. You know how she is. No, Ethan, I said. It's not complicated. It's simple. You're weak. His face twisted. That's not fair. It's true. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. I gave you years of chances. I believed in you. But tonight, I finally saw you for what you are. He swallowed hard. Let's just talk about this. That's the problem, I replied. There's nothing left to talk about. I picked up my suitcase and walked past him, and just as I reached the door, I heard him say it, his final, desperate grasp at control. I'll fight you on this, he said, low, threatening. If you think you're walking away with half of everything, you're mistaken. I turned, looked him in the eye. Oh, Ethan, I said, my voice soft, deadly. You really should read your own contracts more carefully. Confusion flickered across his face. What? You wouldn't even have half of what you own if it weren't for me, I said, stepping closer. You used my money to build your investments. And guess what? I let it hang in the air. I have the paperwork to prove it. He paled. The realization hit him like a gut punch. And I smiled, because Ethan Callahan had just realized the woman he underestimated was the one holding all the cards. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway as I adjusted the strap of my bag. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something. Anything, but words wouldn't save him now. I'll be staying at the penthouse, I said, turning toward the door. His eyebrows pulled together. What penthouse? I paused and tilted my head, genuinely amused. Oh, Ethan, the one you think you own. Confusion flashed in his eyes, followed quickly by alarm. You mean the downtown penthouse? The one you registered under your name, I finished for him, but never actually transferred the deed. His mouth opened, closed. I continued. I had my lawyer review the documents this morning. Turns out the original purchase was made with my trust before we got married. You just assumed it was yours because I let you decorate it and brag about it. His nostrils flared. You wouldn't. I already did. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the kitchen counter. He looked at it like it might explode. Then, slowly, he opened it, his hands trembling as his eyes scanned the paperwork inside. This says, his voice cracked. This says you own 51% of the firm. Correct. He looked up, wild-eyed. That's impossible. I shrugged. Not really. I was the initial investor, remember? The capital that launched your first fund? That was mine. We had it in writing. You just never bothered to read the fine print. No. He took a step back, like the reality physically hurt. No, this can't be. I cut him off. You thought you could intimidate me with legal threats. You thought you could take everything in the divorce. I stepped forward, voice like ice. But here's the truth, Ethan. You own nothing without me. His breath came fast, shallow. You can't just take this from me. I'm not taking anything, I said calmly. I already own it. He gripped the counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. This man, who had once let his mother insult me over Christmas dinner, who had let her call me cheap in front of guests, who had sat in silence while I was treated like an outsider, was now watching his little empire crumble, and I hadn't even raised my voice. I don't understand, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Why are you doing this? I looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the quiet strength I had spent years building, I replied, because I finally see my worth. He didn't move. He couldn't. He stood there, pale and powerless, as I turned and walked out of the house for the last time. 1 month later, I sat on the balcony of the downtown penthouse, a glass of champagne in hand. Below me, the city glittered like it belonged to me, and maybe it did. Across from me, my attorney smiled as she slid the final divorce papers toward me. It's official, she said. You're free. I ran my fingers across the edge of the document. Free. The word had never felt so real. The legal battle had been brutal, but brief. Ethan had tried to fight. Of course he had. He stormed into meetings, demanded better terms, threatened court, but the moment my lawyers laid out the contracts proving I was majority shareholder of his firm, he folded. Vivian tried to intervene too. She called me, furious, screamed through the phone, called me a gold-digging snake. I had responded with one sentence. If you'd raised him better, this wouldn't have happened. Then I blocked her number, because Vivian Callahan was no longer my problem. Neither was Ethan. I took a sip of champagne, savoring the taste and the silence. My phone buzzed. Ethan, can we talk? I stared at the screen, a smirk pulling at my lips. Me. About what? There was a pause. Then another message. Ethan. I don't know what to do. I stared at his words, the irony of it all. For years, I had waited for Ethan to fight for me, to speak up, to protect me, to choose me. And now he needed me more than ever, but I didn't need him at all. I typed one final message. Me. That's not my problem anymore. Then I blocked his number too, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone to rescue me. I had already saved myself. A week after the divorce was finalized, the invitation arrived. It came not by phone or text, but by courier. Thick cream envelope, calligraphy ink, wax seal. The kind of pompous flair only someone like Vivian Callahan could justify using in the digital age. I already knew what it was before I opened it. Inside was a formal invitation to the Callahan Foundation Gala, an annual event where old money dressed in new couture to toast themselves for donating to causes they barely understood. This year's theme? Legacy and leadership. How fitting. But what caught my eye wasn't the embossed gold lettering or the over-the-top venue. It was the small handwritten note at the bottom. We would be honored by your attendance, Vivian. I laughed out loud. Honored. By my attendance. The same woman who once smirked while I stood alone at a restaurant entrance. The same woman who called me a stain on the Callahan name. The same woman who taught her daughters how to sneer with their eyes. And now, suddenly, I was an asset, a name to showcase, a reputation to leverage. because in the fallout from the divorce, something unexpected had happened. I became the story. News of the Callahan divorce and the power shift behind it had made quiet waves in upper social circles. A few financial blogs picked it up. A whisper campaign began. The wife who owned more than the husband. It wasn't scandal, it was spectacle. And Vivian? She couldn't afford to ignore me anymore. Still, I didn't RSVP. I simply showed up. When I arrived at the gala, heads turned. I was dressed in deep emerald silk, minimal jewelry, and confidence tailored to perfection. The doorman greeted me by name. The event coordinator offered me a prime seat near the front. Photographers asked me to pause for a few frames. And Vivian? Vivian was standing by the bar, dressed in her signature icy silver, surrounded by her curated circle of socialites. When she saw me, her smile faltered for the briefest second. Then, with the grace of someone used to controlling a room, she approached. "Samantha," she said smoothly, "you look stunning." I offered a polite smile. "So do you, Vivian." "Thank you for coming," she said, voice low. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I wasn't either," I replied. But then I realized something. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh? This gala is about leadership, isn't it?" I gestured to the grand ballroom. "About legacies?" She nodded stiffly. I leaned in, my voice low enough only she could hear. "Then I think it's time people started seeing where the real leadership came from." Her jaw tensed. I turned to go, but before I could walk away, she said, "You've made your point, Samantha. You won. Do you really need to keep rubbing it in?" I stopped, turned back. "No, Vivian," I said. "I didn't win. I survived. There's a difference." Her expression froze. "You see," I continued, "you tried to erase me. From your dinners, your family, your name, you worked so hard to make me feel small." I paused, meeting her eyes. "But I was never small. You just couldn't stand how big I was becoming." Across the room, a speaker tapped the microphone. The crowd quieted as the keynote address was about to begin. I took a step toward the main table. Vivian didn't follow, because this time she wasn't invited to the seat that mattered. The irony? She was still standing at the bar, on the sidelines of a legacy she once believed was hers to control. And me? I sat at the center table, next to a tech philanthropist and a state senator, introduced as the keynote speaker's strategic advisor. Vivian could barely mask her disbelief, because tonight, I wasn't the wife or the outsider or the woman on the edge of the photo. Tonight, I was the headline. Weeks passed. The world moved on, as it always does. The Callahans returned to their glass mansion and carefully curated appearances. Haley and Brooke kept their distance, unsure how to approach the woman who had so effortlessly dismantled the pedestal their family had built for itself. Ethan, well, he stayed quiet, like he always had. But I didn't. I lived. I thrived. The downtown penthouse became more than just a place to stay. It became a symbol of everything I had built on my own terms. I repainted the walls, changed the furniture, opened the curtains wide every morning as if to remind myself, you're not hiding anymore. Business opportunities followed, invitations, speaking panels. People wanted to hear from the woman who walked out and took it all. But they were missing the real story. I didn't take anything. I had always owned it. All I did was stop pretending I didn't. One evening, while reviewing a contract over tea, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a hesitant voice. Familiar, unsteady. "Hi, it's Ethan." I almost laughed, but I didn't. "What do you want?" He hesitated. I thought maybe we could talk. It's been a while." "It's been long enough," I replied. Another pause. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I waited. "For everything," he continued. "For not standing up for you. For letting my mother treat you that way. For," his voice cracked, "for not choosing you when it mattered." I let his words hang there, soft and brittle. Once, I would have cried hearing them. Once, I would have held on to them like lifelines. But now, Now they were just echoes from another life. "Thank you," I said simply. He sounded surprised. "That's it?" "That's all there needs to be," I replied. "You're apologizing. I'm accepting. We're moving on." He swallowed. "You look happy, from what I see online." "You look like you're really doing well." "I am," I said truthfully. "For the first time, I'm not trying to fit into someone else's version of me. I guess I never really saw you, did I?" "No," I said. "But that's okay, because I do." And that's what mattered. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the counter. No anger, no lingering sadness. Just quiet finality. Closure isn't always a dramatic scene or a door slamming shut. Sometimes it's the calm after the storm. The peace in knowing you're no longer waiting for someone else to validate your worth. A few days later, I took a walk by the waterfront near the penthouse, watching the sunset melt into the skyline. A woman passed me, probably in her early 30s, holding the hand of a little girl. They laughed at something small, maybe a shared joke, or the way the seagulls danced above the water. And I smiled, not because I envied them, but because I understood them. There's a certain freedom in being seen, in being enough. I had spent years trying to earn a seat at a table I didn't even want, bending myself to fit expectations I didn't believe in, shrinking so someone else could shine. But now I was building my own table. I wasn't the girl who got left out of the reservation anymore. I was the woman who owned the building. So when people ask me what really happened that night, what finally made me leave, I tell them the truth. It wasn't the insult. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't even the wine glass slammed too hard against the table. It was the moment I realized I had always been enough. They just couldn't handle it. But I can. And now, I carry that truth with me, unapologetically, uncompromisingly, and completely free. She was left off the reservation, publicly humiliated, silenced by her own husband. But what no one expected was that she held all the power. This is the story of Samantha, a woman everyone dismissed until the night she stood up, walked out, and changed everything. A tale of quiet revenge, dignity, and the strength that comes from knowing your worth. Stay until the end. Her final move will leave you speechless.